Washington is on their way to the national championship, and we have so many more thoughts.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a special midday edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Up front, apologize for any audio issues you might have with this episode. Lars and I are sitting here, and I'm just finicking with my microphone the whole time. He's telling me all these. I'm just like, I'm sorry, man. I don't know what happened to my microphone, but it's broken over here. So we'll see how that goes over. Hopefully everything sounds all right. But we are here because I didn't even update the graphic. We're having so much fun here this morning. Washington is on their way to the national championship. And Lars, just give me some more takeaways from this game. What do you have for me?
Yeah, see, here's the thing that, as you kind of, 2 days removed, you just kind of look back at the game, not even just rewatching it, but just kind of thinking about it, obviously watched it a couple of times now. And the one thing that really stands out to me, especially when you're looking at now the match going into Michigan, where they won by 7 in overtime against certainly a weaker offensive Alabama team than what Washington's going to be bringing to the table in the national championship game, that Washington should have probably won by 14 or more points. They played from start to finish like they were the team that was already in the national championship game. So to me, and especially, but the problem that kind of arose as a result of that is Texas was a perfect matchup for Washington because they have an awful secondary, right? I mean, again, Washington's isn't technically much better, but look who actually made the plays. You mentioned the Asa Turner fumble, Mish Powell pressuring Quinn Ewers on third down to force a quick throw and burn another play on that final drive. There's all a bunch of key, and Elijah Jackson to seal the win, right? For everyone saying, "Oh, Quinn Ewers throws a better ball, that's a touchdown." I'm like, I feel like Elijah Jackson isn't still getting. He's gotten some of the credit, but I feel like even if it was a poorly thrown ball, right? I'm sure. And again, I heard Joel Klatt say, "Well, if Michael Penix throws that ball," I'm like, "Well, hang on, time out." If you start the sentence with "if Michael Penix throws that ball," you could say that for any team. He could do that for Alabama. He could do that for Georgia. He could do that for Michigan, for instance, right? But the fact that Washington outclassed Texas in a true road game going into this matchup in Michigan, it gives you all the hope in the world that they can actually do what needs to be done to claim a third national championship. But the only thing that is scary is the fact that this is now this is the Texas end of the matchup for Washington by facing Michigan, because Michigan and Blake Corum could just run the ball on every play and win the national championship. There's nothing preventing that from happening.
No, that you're absolutely right, and that's my biggest concern. I know so that's something we're definitely gonna expand on a little bit more on tomorrow's show as well, because that was something I noticed just right away with just Texas' first play from scrimmage, just gashing with CJ Baxter for 8-9 yards, and they did that over and over and over again, and it felt like they kind of went away from that for whatever reason. I know they fumbled twice, and that probably had something to do with that. But once they went down, they just immediately went to the pass, which is fine, pretty standard there. But they were just doing such an effective job of running the football. I don't understand why we didn't see a little bit more of that. But one thing that really stood out to me, and I know that it's very typical and something we talked about a lot on our last show, but it's Michael Penix. Because the biggest thing that we're going to see from Michigan is just an absolutely fantastic defense. They get after the quarterback really well. They recorded 38 sacks, I think it is, this year, and 16 interceptions. So they do such an amazing job on the defensive side of the football. But Michael Penix, behind this offensive line, this fantastic trio of receivers, did just basically whatever he wanted. That was just one of the best games from a quarterback I've ever seen in the Sugar Bowl. And I think that we can still see him take it to another level, because obviously we saw how dialed in he was for this big game. And now with everything on the line, I think that he's got a major opportunity to just take it to another level and just put the team on his back one more time for all the marbles.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the true narrative, right? Where I believe J.J. McCarthy is going to the NFL. Could be wrong about that, but regardless, I believe there's, kind of like the same thing with Quinn Ewers, right? Where there's a chance if he comes back or whatever, this is for all the marbles, right? This team was solely built to come back and win a national championship. That was the whole point of everybody making their decisions when they did. And then the additions that, Dillon Johnson on defense, getting Jabbar Muhammad, things like that. And it's just this narrative. And it really is kind of the coolest narrative now because it's America's quote unquote team versus America's actual team. And I'm talking about quote unquote Michigan and actually Washington.
Right.
Because again, first of all, you kind of got to give Jim Harbaugh his props because the man is a phenomenal coach. Pre-Connor Stallions, post-Connor Stallions, the man dominated the NFL, college, brought Michigan back from nothing. Can we just also take a moment to think about the fact that a couple of years ago, Jim Harbaugh got an extension and pay reduction. Right. And now is back. So again, for all the Connor Stallions, I love the jokes. Don't get me wrong. I'm here for the Connor Stallions.
No way. I'm stunned personally.
A couple of weeks after it broke, I saw an NFL scout on the sideline, and he had like his earpiece in, doing whatever and doing a mic recording. And I'm like, hey, there's the Connor Stallions right there. But with all that being said, obviously it was a joke because it was an NFL scout. But it's just kind of crazy how everything is culminated to this point, and you kind of knew. That's the thing about Washington, and it's been said, and it's kind of cheap. It's not a shot at them, right? They played down to Arizona State. Actually played up to Washington, which probably is the more correct narrative of that. But they looked inferior in that game and in certain other ones. But when the game was on the line and when they truly had to have it this season, USC, Oregon once, Oregon twice, Texas, they showed up and showed out. Not just hung around, right? And it was the same thing with USC, where I don't believe USC led in that game, kind of similar to the Sugar Bowl, where it's like they were tied. Again, I could be wrong, but the point being, it never felt like UW was truly out of that game or in jeopardy of truly losing that game.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So you talk about the showing up to the occasion, because one last thing is this comment here from Jackson Shore, because this is such a huge part of it. Michigan's got a really good offensive line, and he says, can we talk about Trice? So many fans have said he's been really disappointing this year, obviously due to the lack of sacks, but he was dominant all game. 8 pressures, 2 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. He was all over the field. He did a fantastic job, and this Michigan offensive line is going to be a little different. It's a really great group. And I'm not saying that Trice isn't, able to play up to that competition. He absolutely can. It's a future first-round pick. Let's be real. But I think that they're going to need more than just Braylon Trice in this game to get after J.J. McCarthy. Because I think J.J. McCarthy is a fine quarterback. I don't know if he's necessarily just a game changer where, you're going to be super afraid of him to say, this is the guy who's going to put the game away. Right? Where if Michigan wants to put the game away, they're going to give it to Blake Corum. That's what they're going to do. They're not going to say, all right, J.J. McCarthy, we trust you to go make a throw. He's got some talented receivers. Roman Wilson's a really good player. Colston Loveland, another really good player. I like both those guys a lot. But Braylon Trice is going to need to have another big game. But I'm really curious just to see who else is going to step up next to him and just be somebody else that's going to make a play.
Yeah, and within that, where that all starts is with the scheme, because when you see Washington kind of have so much gap separation in which, again, despite, Fatui and Tuli guys know, and the entire defensive line, they're all long. So it's not a massive like gulf. But when you just see that going against a 5, 6 man, 7 man, even offensive line, it's like, now that you're playing for all the marbles, I could absolutely see Chuck Morrell kind of just throwing, not caution to the wind, but really bringing some new looks that Washington hasn't even shown to kind of combat that strong offensive line, because it's for all the marbles. And I think this coaching staff has proven, especially on defense, like we got to give the defense credit. They carried this team really in the last half of the season. Again, the offense still did its thing, but it certainly was nowhere near what it was at the start of the season. Up until the Sugar Bowl. Then after that, it was certainly that was the offense.
I think the Pac-12 championship game would be like the turning point, and then it's finally back at full strength. But Lars, there's speaking of the offense, there's some good news on Dillon Johnson, and we're going to get to that next. Right after we talk about our friends over at LinkedIn, because at the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn is a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1, delivering quality hires versus leading vendors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, I believe it was on Dave Softy Mahler's radio show that Ryan Grubb went on and said that Dillon Johnson's x-rays were negative, and that seems to be a really good sign. It does sound like he's going to end up playing in the national championship on Monday. And he's just been such a huge part of this offense all year long that this is really, really important because there's just a lot of question marks behind him at running back. And like we said on our last show, this has really just been the Dillon Johnson show all year long.
Yeah, I mean, again, because Cam Davis went out with if Cam Davis is playing, just imagine that with this offense. Just because then, with or without Dillon's injuries, this offense is so much different. And again, I know that sounds crazy to think about, but like you have 2 running backs that can actually get 10+ touchdowns. Now you can actually match Blake Corum, right? Then those 2 is Michigan's 1. But without Cam Davis this entire season, Dillon Johnson has done a fantastic job carrying the load. The concern that I have is somebody else, and we've seen it a little bit, right? We saw Richard Newton get an appearance. We saw Sam Adams in the Pac-12 championship game, but then he got hurt in between that and the Sugar Bowl, apparently. You know, that's kind of what Ryan Grubb said even at the start of the season, is that, and throughout the season as well. It's, again, I'm just more curious why no Daniel Ngata? Like what's happening? What's happening there? Like, again, first of all, the other thing about Dillon Johnson that not even Tyba Rogers can offer at this point in time is his pass blocking. And that, especially against Michigan, when you have that extra pressure coming, that linebacker coming, that is the guy where Mike needs that extra half second. That's why he hasn't been sacked. If you're now starting Tyba Rogers against Michigan, I'm not so confident. Again, now it sounds like certainly Dillon Johnson's going to play, but the concern is how much does he play? Does he re-aggravate it early? But the one thing about Dillon Johnson, this goes back to his time at Mississippi State. So I remember I talked to him in February after he signed, committed, all that stuff. He was coming to Washington. That after he I forgot what the knee injury was, but he suffered a knee injury midway through last season and came back like way sooner than anybody expect. I think he came back like 2 weeks later. They had a bye week in between, so that helped. But he came back and really wasn't totally hampered by it for the rest of the season. And it's like, that to me tells me that no matter what, 70% Dillon Johnson is probably better than most people's 100% number 1 back. Like, not Blake Corum, obviously.
No, definitely not Blake Corum.
just to be clear, I did want to
player, man.
Right, but that's what's gotten Washington to this point. So now it's around Will Nixon, Richard Newton, maybe. You just need, with Michael Penix, all you need is just a little bit of a balance. You don't need a 200. You don't need USC, the performance against USC, right? You just need something to say, hey, we also can run the ball for 3 or 4+ yards. Yep.
No, you're right. And that was one of our things going into this game, right? And of course, like, we didn't see that happening. Texas did a fantastic job in the run game, especially just up the middle. They did what, was expected of them. And Dillon was stifled a little bit, but Michael Penix had his back. But just the threat of having that seemed to just kind of leave Texas a little bit off at certain points. And he still scored 2 touchdowns. I'm not saying that, Michael wouldn't have found a way to get those balls into the end zone, but just having that guy inside the 5-yard line, especially, is so helpful for this team. He's been there in so many key spots, has picked up so many key first downs, and they did a little bit in this game where his pass catching prowess showed up, where we still haven't seen it a ton, but it was there at times. And just having that threat, that true 3-down guy, is the impact that he has on this offense cannot be understated.
And it honestly can't be replicated. That's the other part of it. I've had people, I'm sure you've been asked this as well. Can Cam Davis play? It's like, I don't think I don't think at this point, I know for sure he's walking around like there's no brace, because he's well past, well into the recovery portion of his rehab, but that's not in play. That hasn't been in play all season. So unfortunately, that won't be the case because, man, like I said, if you could it's almost like Zach Durfee, right? If you had, I'll give you 10 snaps. Sure. Cam Davis. That's all you need. Like, and maybe even taking a carry on 3 or 4 of them. It's like you don't need him really. You just need the threat of it. And I think that's kind of similar to your point in the first segment, where you need more than Braylon Trice. You need more than Dillon Johnson, just a little bit, right? You just Zion Tupuola-Fetui getting a little, because he got a pressure. They all got a pressure. They all got one. Braylon was the game wrecker, obviously, but maybe. These are kind of the moments where, and again, I'm just going to use the hype train to cheat here. Like, if Zach Durfee could get a sack in this game against Michigan, the whole season, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he didn't play all season. He could have done nothing and played all season, and then gets a sack in the national championship game. That is all that matters. And that's all that matters, because at this point in the season, it's like, to use your favorite analogy here, it's like Game 7 of the World Series. It's like you've now gotten through all of these, and I'm saying that because Mariners fans have no idea what we're talking about if I mention the World Series. So with that being said, I'm sorry, it's just a fact.
You're not joking,
but I'm not. I'm so sadly talking accuracy here. But it's like Game 7 to where it doesn't matter how many guys you have in the bullpen if they pitch 4 days in a row. It's like, can you get one out? I just need you to get one out. So we're going a third of an inning at a time. One play at a time. You're just trying to buy 4 plays here, 2 plays there, because that's what a national championship, and as Kalen DeBoer said, that's what playoffs are like. It's kind of funny to hear him always talking like, it's like the playoffs. Like, I've coached in the playoff many times. It's like, where have you been all this time? Like, where?
Right.
How did we go from A to B, A to Z, and then back to B? Like, why couldn't we just go A to B? What happened there?
So I know you mentioned Cameron Davis. I want to get one point. Also, Josh Chin's here in the comments asking, what's a World Series? And seems very hurt. I mean, hey, I've seen my team win 4. It's pretty great. Love it. Go Sox. But Cameron Davis did say he's going to practice in the spring. So that's a good sign. That's a positive, but you're right. When it comes to what we're seeing from Dillon Johnson, there just hasn't been that additional factor behind him. And if Will Mixon comes in, gets 5-10 carries, and shows some of the flash that he did early on in the season, that's great. But this is a question we had early on in the season. And it didn't end up becoming an issue, which is great. That's fine. The offense was able to find ways to overcome not being able to run the ball early. Then they ran the ball really well late on in the season. But now that there's no Dillon Johnson, or that there wasn't, there was that question. It was, what else are you going to see? And if he's limited to 10, 15, 20 snaps, the question is, what kind of threat are you going to get from the running game instead of just letting Michigan be able to drop 8 because they know you want to throw it on every single play?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we've seen Jeremy Bernard. I swear we saw Jalen Polk line up as a running back before they shifted into motion. And
I saw Jalen McMillan and Jeremy Bernard for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I swear it was just one play because it didn't happen again, but it was like they lined up out of the pistol and then obviously motioned in to the more traditional lined up next to the quarterback. But yeah, and so that's kind of what and that's the thing about Ryan Grubb is he's stated numerous times he's not going to put guys in unless he's 100% confident. And that's not an insult to those players, but it's like, hey, as a coach, it would be irreparable for me to say, hey, Richard Newton, we need you to start, or we need you to be like on the biggest play. And it's not a slight to Richard Newton here, but it's just like, because the question after the game was, well, why didn't you go with Dillon, Tybo, Nixon? It's like the list goes down, and it's not an insult to Richard Newton, right? I'm just using him as an example. You could say the same thing about Will Nixon, Tybo Rogers. I was going to use Tybo being a freshman, but because he played so much, it's a little harder. But again, imagine Tybo getting, 21 carries and Dillon Johnson only gets 10, but Dillon Johnson has been totally healthy and didn't have any, and had like, let's say 80, 90 yards with those 10 carries. Like, it would be inexcusable, almost irreparable coaching malpractice, if you will, to, put players in those situations. And the coaches are not going to do that. And we've heard that time and time again. It's on the coaches to put the players in the best position to succeed. So that means choosing the right players and knowing and having total confidence that I don't have to look up after I call the play. I can just call the next play.
Right. So I want to get to one question here really fast because we got a good question here in the comments, and it also just leads into what we're talking about just in terms of the future and recruiting. So Ben Day asks, is Will Rogers on campus, and who are the projected starting receivers next season? Yes, he is. And then Lars, stop me if you disagree, but Jeremiah Hunter, Jeremy Bernard, and Denzel Boston and Giles Jackson are going to fight for that third spot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
So next, we're going to talk about Josiah Sharma because I watched this kid's film after he committed the other day, and he's a big defensive tackle, and he can really play. So, Lars, have you gotten a chance to watch Josiah Sharma's film yet? The 3-star defensive tackle from Northern California, who is the second commit now in the class of 2025.
Yeah, the first thing I'm just going to briefly summarize because I know you watched more than I did, but just the one thing that popped right in my head when you watch the first 5 plays, I was not highlights, but just what I like to do is watch individual games, like see like where does he pop up in individual games. The first 5 plays of every game, automatically when Kalen DeBoer said, we need those type of bodies and those type of players in the Big Ten.
That was my first thought too.
Yep.
So I agree with you there. Absolutely. 6'5", 295. And he looks like he can add a whole lot more weight to his frame too. But the first thing that I said when I saw him just move and rush the passer and get into the backfield, he's moving insanely well for his size. Where there are a lot of guys that are that big that just shouldn't be able to move in some of the ways he does. Where it's all projection, it's all athleticism, especially at defensive tackle. But he's doing such a good job with his movement. And one thing that I really like is that there's some semblance of a pass rush plan and pass rush moves. There's one play where he gives like a semi-swim move, and I don't see a lot of defensive tackles doing that at the high school level. So combining that with his size and just that understanding of what he wants to do as a pass rusher all point towards him potentially being a future 3-down lineman, if you will, because I can see him on the interior. Just you don't need to take him out first, second down. Yeah, he can stop the run really well, but then he can also get off the pass a little bit when you need it. And with that size, he can take on double teams. He's going to be able to do a little bit of everything because I think that this training staff, this coaching staff can get him right and help turn him into the best version of himself. But I think that there's so much upside here that he's going to be a huge riser late in the process.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what struck me as well, is when you look at what he can become, right? Because you're not getting obviously a finished product no matter who you're getting in high school. But when you're taking a guy so early in the class, you think, okay, how much more can he grow? And to your point, obviously, once he gets on campus at Washington, Ron McKeefrey and the staff will absolutely get him dialed in. But it's a matter of, okay, he's not just a run stuffer, right? Which, again, it can be fine. Right? You can take those big bodies, but the more you're going into the Big Ten and needing to play almost like an NFL caliber of defense, you want to have those 3-down linemen, those guys that can hold up in the run, but also aren't ugly when they're rushing the passer, right? Or it's not an accident when they happen to get a little bit of pressure. So I think, and especially if you know Inoke Rectorfield, like that to me seems like the perfect person for him to grow under, because he knows how to use that type of size, not just as a run stuffer, but also as a pass rusher. So I think it's a perfect combination. And to me, it kind of says a lot knowing when you look at his offers, it's not, there's no wow offer there, right? You know, he had just gotten offered by Washington State. Arizona was another one. There's a couple, but it's early on in the 25 process. But it speaks to then both Washington's evaluation that they were in on him so early, and then knowing that they're going to have the coaching, and you're coming off a potential national championship. You're not going to have those schools saying, really, you want to go to Washington? Like they're 9-2, they're 10-2, they're playing for, Vegas Bowls, they're playing for playoffs. It's like, actually, they just won a national championship, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon.
So I love your point, because that was something you and I addressed during the lead up to the Sugar Bowl, where where a lot of these national recruiting services have been killing Washington, saying, "Oh, this is the lowest rated recruiting class that a playoff team has ever had." And of course, not a lot of these guys, that are contributing in a big way on this championship team are part of, Kalen DeBoer's first or second recruiting class. But it just speaks to the talent evaluation. that these guys have had 2 years now to see everybody that's in the room, see everything that is that they like and that they want, and just say, okay, these are the guys we're going to prioritize. And with some of the development we've seen from not just these players in the room, but transfers, like Michael Penix being a prime example, and just some of the younger guys where we've seen a little bit of them. One guy that I like to point to is defensive tackle Javon Parker, where he hasn't necessarily had a huge role this season, but everything you've seen from him is super promising, where he was in the same vein as Sharma, just an unranked 3-star, really low recruit, but projectable for so many different ways. And we saw him produce as a true freshman. We've seen his role take a step back a little bit this year, mainly because there weren't nearly as many injuries along the defensive line. But that's something where I'm just at the point where I really like this coaching staff's evaluation process. And especially when we look at some of the bodies they've gotten along the defensive line, which, again, as you opened the segment with, which is what Kalen DeBoer is saying, we need these kinds of guys in the Big Ten. Josiah Sharma is a perfect example of that.
And picking up right on the Javon Parker point, he was technically the highest rated player on defense for Washington in the Sugar Bowl. Granted, he only played 8 snaps, so it's kind of hard to say that. And then Braylon Trice was obviously number 2 right behind him. But again, that small sample size matching the level of impact that Braylon Trice could have. And worth noting, of the 8 snaps that he played, 7 were pass rush, not run. So that tells me also how Washington views not only, because they know he can stop the run, right? He's shown that in spurts, right? But I think that's where he's going to have the most impact is his ability to rush the passer. And so the fact that they're getting him those reps in a Sugar Bowl in a reserve capacity, now when you lose Tua Taylor next year, potentially Fatu, and obviously Bandis and others, those guys now have those banked reps in big time games and big time moments, not just against Montana State or Tulsa. It's which again still count. No disrespect, no, not catching a stray for either program there, but it's a little bit different when, hey, I have experience playing in multiple games. Also, by the way, including a Sugar Bowl, and now and probably a national championship as well. And honestly, the same thing can be said for Zach Durfee, just to kind of tie that knot there, because all these guys having, so it also helps to kind of, I'm going to put a massive circle on this. The Will Rogers question, when I said that there's a culture overlap, I said that on the live show, I believe last time, where I said, now you're having these new freshmen come in, Peyton Waters, Pocky, all these guys, Jason Robinson come in. That's why you brought Austin Mack in a year early, to have him learn and watch Michael Penix chase a national championship. Now he knows how to do it, and he's getting Will Rogers as a right-handed quarterback to also kind of learn and understand from, along with Dylan Morris, who, again, is a phenomenal player. And just, honestly, I think it's kind of like a, hey, let's just kind of go have your last year, and then we'll come back as a GA. Like, just kind of,
that's absolutely the plan in that case, yeah.
And it's honestly good because it allows Dillon to get away from Washington, kind of learn something new, maybe pick up some new stuff, and then come back to Kalen and learn even more. So I think it's a happy win all around. But that's why and now you're doing it in recruiting, where you're bringing in Josiah Sharma with Javon Parker and all those guys obviously having 2 years in the bank. We haven't even seen Armon Parker that much, and he might be even better than Javon. So
sure,
you're not just, okay, this is like a good body for the future. It's like, yeah, he's not going to be relied upon, but now we have all these guys. You just want to get the talent in the room. That's what Georgia does. That's what Alabama does. Granted, they're 5 stars. And that's where, to your point about, okay, well, the recruiting rankings are this or that. Well, here's the thing. As we go on, the transfer portal recruiting rankings are going to be just as much, if not as important, as high school recruiting rankings.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure he's proven he can do it at quarterback, cornerback, linebacker, pretty good. Defense, there's a number of players. So now it's like, okay, we haven't seen a defensive lineman yet, but now we have Sebastian Valdez
and BJ Green, who's still supposed to sign in February.
Right, but I'm of the ones that we can firmly, confidently talk about.
Fair.
Because again, crazy world in 24, we never know what happens. But BJ Green should sign. But with that being said, it's about stacking the room, having the culture overlap, so that guys now coming in are going to say, hey, we can't let them down because look what we inherited, given what they inherited. They inherited 4-8 and turned it into potentially 15-0. We are now inheriting 15-0. That bar is pretty. Now, again, the bar is now not every year going to be 15-0, right? Because this is a very special team.
That would be wild.
But I think the bar is at least 10-2. right? At 10-2 minimum, 11-1 preferably. And again, then you get to your playoff discussions and things like that. But 10 wins was the bar. That was set last year. This is just, okay, what's the peak? Floor is 10 wins, ceiling is potentially 15. Sure. You can't ask for much better.
No, and so just kind of on that point, that's exactly what you want when it turns to just the talent. You can find the talent. It's just, and it's more how you develop it and what you can do with it, because what we've seen just from the staff is that they will find a way to develop it, and they've done a really good job of that. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in on this midday live show. We hope we maybe gave you a little break in your day at work. We really appreciate you tuning in and joining us. And if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel every single day with new content. We are going to be back on a regular schedule starting tomorrow. So don't worry. You're not going to have to, just randomly see whenever we're going to be posting shows. Please make sure to like the video, leave a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. It all really helps the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.